The most iconic superhero pose of the 1980s. The one where the guy in the silver suit bends so low his chest almost hits his knee.
Kenji Gavan!
Fist pulled back like he's winding up a punch that could shatter metal. It was invented by a 26-year-old stuntman who was told that the original idea was kind of boring. You have seen this pose. You know it, even if you've never seen a single episode of the show. It's in homages, it's in memes, it's buried in the choreography of a Tarantino film. And I tried to do it in my kitchen once and my shoulder made a sound I still think about. Anyway, Oba Kenji died on May 6, 2026 at 14:23 in the afternoon in a hospital in Ehime Prefecture. He was 72 years old, and the agency that announced his death described him as a man who had been fighting an unnamed illness for about 8 years. The funeral was private, family only. His daughter, a voice actor named Wakaba now, posted a message that ended with the line, "Dad, you really did a great job. When you arrive safely, have your favorite drinks and eat lots of delicious food." If that name, Oba Kenji, means nothing to you, that's kind of the point, because the man was a bridge, a direct physical link between the stunt dojos of the 1970s Japan and the action cinema the entire world ended up watching. And you have been watching his work and the work of the system he came from without ever knowing his name. That is, if you don't know. But if you do, Oba was born Takahashi Kenji in 1955 in Matsuyama, a city on the island of Shikoku. As a teenager, he fell in love with the actor Shin'ichi Chiba, what became Sonny Chiba, as you know it, and got so obsessed with Chiba's action drama that he dropped out of high school and in 1971 joined the Japan Action Club as one of his very first members. The JAC was Chiba's own stunt and action training program, a kind of boot camp that produced people who could fight, fall, and act all at once, performers who didn't hand off the hard stuff to a double because they were the double. And Oba became exactly that. A guy who did his own flips, his own wirework, his own contact hits, starting as an uncredited stuntman on a show called Android Kikaider in 1972. His mentor, Chiba, gave him his stage name, Oba Kenji, with a character for big and the suggestion that it should mean grow big. And the name, in a way, became a challenge. Oba was not the lead in his early tokusatsu roles. He played Battle Kenja in Battle Fever J, one of the color-coded warriors in the Super Sentai franchise. He played Denzi Blue in the next series. He was a face in a helmet, a body in a suit, doing backflips off of exploding platform. And that might have been the whole story. Another stunt career built on bruises and brevity, except for what happened in 1982. The show was called the Space Sheriff Gavan. It was the first of the Metal Hero series, a new kind of tokusatsu that was honestly a little cooler than the spandex team that came before it. Oba was cast as the leads. Ichijoji, that's a space cop who transforms by shouting "Dojo!" and donning a chrome combat suit. And this is where the detective part starts, because if you ever seen a gif of a Japanese hero doing an impossibly deep crouching transformation, you assumed it was just part of the show's original design. It wasn't. The pose that defines Gavan, the one that he bends over like he's folding himself in half, then snaps upward, was not in the script, it's not in the storyboard. The original idea was just a simple fist raise. An action director on set looked at that and said, essentially, this doesn't serve the kids. It doesn't give them anything to imitate. And Oba, a stuntman actor, stood there and invented the pose on the spot. He thought about what a child could see and copy and what would feel powerful and alien at the same time. He built the image that would become the central icon of the franchise. That detail, that the most recognizable thing about Gavan, was created by the performer and not the writers or the directors, tells you what kind of system the GAC was. These were not people following instructions, they were people who understood physical storytelling at the bone level, who could look at a motion and know whether it would land in a living room 3 meters from a CRT television. And Oba's version landed so hard, it became the blueprint. Every transformation sequence in the Metal Hero series after that, and countless parodies and references, traces back to one guy bending his spine in a parking lot. Now,
wiggle your big toe.
You're probably wondering how this connects to Quentin Tarantino, because it does, directly. And that connection is one of those pieces of film history that sounds made up until you look at the credits. In 2003, Tarantino was making Kill Bill Volume 1, his love letter to Kung Fu cinema and the Japanese action films he's devoured on VHS. He already cast Sonny Chiba, Oba's mentor, as Hattori Hanzo, the legendary swordsmith. And Tarantino, being Tarantino, knew exactly who else had to come out of Chiba's action clan. He directly invited Oba to appear in the film. Oba played Shiro, the bold sushi shop assistant who stands beside Hanzo, the one who, in that quiet sunlit scene, says almost nothing but looks like he could kill you with a chopsticks. What's wild is that this wasn't just a cameo, it was a living lineage. The man who trained under Chiba, who had done hundreds of fight scenes on Japanese television, was now standing next to his master in a major Hollywood film that would define action cinema for a decade, just for the decade. And almost nobody in the Western audience knew who he was. They saw a bald guy who looked dangerous. They didn't see the 1982 transformation pose hiding in the way he held his shoulder. But the physicality was there. The same controlled stillness, the same coiled energy. Oba returned for a flashback in Kill Bill Volume 2, and that was his Hollywood moment. But he didn't chase a career in America. After Gavan, he'd already made a different choice, one that reveals what kind of person this was. In 1987, at the height of his Tokusatsu fame, he left Tokyo and went back to Matsuyama. His mother was ill, and he decided to go home and care for her. He founded a small event company called Luckjet, which produced children's shows and community events. Basically, he started entertaining kids in person instead of through a screen. He also ran an action training school, teaching the next generation how to fall and fight safely. He never stopped being a stuntman. He just did it in his hometown without credits or camp. And here's the part where the story tightens. In 2018, Oba collapsed at his home. He was hospitalized and spent the next 8 years in rehabilitation, trying to get back to a condition where he could perform again. His family, at his request, never publicly disclosed the specific illness. There was speculation, of course. Some outlets suggested a stroke, but nothing was ever confirmed. What we do know from an interview with his wife after his death is that by April of 2026, about a month before he died, it had become difficult for him to speak. And yet, in January of that same year, his daughter, Wakaba now, posted a photo from a hospital visit. She wrote that she and her brother had gone to see him and told him that a new Space Sheriff series was beginning, the first in years. It's a revival called the Cho Uju Keiichi Gavan Infinity. She said that she told her father and she posted it with a smiley face. The show premiered on April 27th, 2026, 9 days before he died. You could argue that this is just coincidence, that a dying man's legacy happened to restart right before his end, and there's no deeper mechanism at work. Another possibility is that it's simply a quirk of timing. One objection might be that Tokusatsu revivals happen all the time, and this one just lined up by chance. But when you look at how the entertainment industry actually operates, how nostalgia gets greenlit, how fan campaigns build momentum, and how an actor sustains presence at conventions and in interviews keeps a character alive in the cultural bloodstream, you realize that this wasn't random. Oba had been showing up for decades during panels, appearing in crossover films like the 2012 Go Gaiker vs. Gavan movie. He kept the character alive. The new series exists in part because he never stopped being Gavan for an audience that kept growing up and passing the shows to their kids. The mechanism was his own quiet, stubborn refusal to vanish. And that is the point where the detective lays down the evidence. The pose you've seen in YouTube compilation. The bald guy in Kill Bill who looked familiar but you couldn't place. The news that a 72-year-old Japanese actor died and it trended on social media. You were living inside his influence without knowing there was a name attached to it. The cause that wasn't a single show. It was a system. The JAC Chiba's mentorship, the physical craft of doing your own stunts that produced performers who embedded themselves so deeply in global pop culture that they become invisible. But what that system believed behind isn't just footage. It's a daughter who now voices characters in the same kind of shows, and a wife who ran his company after he collapsed, and a generation of stunt performers in Japan who still teach the falls he taught. Now you know why his death hit the way it did. It wasn't nostalgia for an old show. It was the sudden recognition of a thread that had been running through the entire media diet. From the gif you saw online to the crazy 88 fight scene you watched in high school, Kenji Oba was on that thread. He was 71 years old and his real name was Takahashi Kenji. He grew up a fan of Sonny Chiba and he ended up standing beside him in a Tarantino film, having created the pose that an entire country would imitate in schoolyards. The arc doesn't need poetry, it's already complete. And his daughter's message ended with, "Dad, you really did a great job. I kept thinking about it." But a girl telling her father, who could barely speak by then, that a new version of his character was about to fly across the screen again. And then the show aired and it did fly. A week later, he was gone. Anyway, that's the story of a guy who bent his body so far forward that a generation leaned in. Subscribe!
Retsu Ichijoji Gavan!